Estamos llegando al final de una semana llena de revelaciones, llena de ideas brillantes. Y ya sabéis que toda buena historia acaba con un gran final. Para clausurar esta tercera edición del Lighted 2020, tenemos con nosotros a una figura de relevancia mundial. Premio Princesa de Asturias de Cooperación 2019 y un auténtico abanderado de la innovación educativa. Estoy hablando del matemático, ingeniero e informático Salman Khan. Formado en Harvard y en el MIT, Salman ha conseguido convulsionar el panorama educativo con la creación de Academia Khan, una plataforma de aprendizaje online gratuita y sin publicidad con más de 72 millones de usuarios en todo el mundo. Su modelo pedagógico se basa en los llamados mapas de contenidos, un software que encuentra conexiones entre temas para generar ejercicios de forma automática. Pero vamos a dejar que sea el propio Salman Khan quien nos lo cuente. Es todo un honor para mí poder saludar a Salman Khan. It's an honor to have Salman Khan here. Part of Enlightened's philosophy focuses on giving importance to innovation applied to education. So being able to close this event with him is a privilege. Welcome to Enlightened 2020. Sal, tell us, what can we expect for the future of education?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And that's a big question that I think a lot about. But I encourage everyone to take anything I have to say with a grain of salt, because it's always hard to predict the future. But I'll tell you what I think we know. So even before COVID hit, there was some basic principles that we have been trying to do from Khan Academy. As you introduced, Khan Academy, we're a not-for-profit. Our mission is free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. It started as really a project for me to tutor my cousins, and I started writing some software for them. And then I started making videos for them, and they told me that they liked me better on YouTube than in person, so I kept going. And so by 2009, it was a real organization. I had quit my job. And there's always been three pillars to Khan Academy. The first is, can we make all of the material from pre-K through elementary, middle, high school, and college available for free for anyone in the world, in all of the world's major languages. And that kind of introduces this idea that everyone has access and that learning should not be bound by time or space. The second pillar that we've been advocating for and trying to build to enable is, if students learn something, can we make it so that the learning adapts to the student as opposed to the student have to adapt to the learning? In a traditional academic model, what happens, and this is the schools that you and I grew up in, we'll have a lecture, then we'll have some homework, lecture homework, and then 2 weeks go by, and then we might have a test. And then on that test, let's say that I get a 70%, you get a 90%, even though we have identified gaps on that test. I didn't know 30% of the material that happened to be on the test. You didn't know 10%. Even though we identify the gaps, the whole class has to move on to the next concept. Probably a concept that builds on those gaps. Maybe I got a 70% on basic exponents, and now the whole class is going to move on to negative exponents or logarithms. Or maybe I only knew dividing decimals 80%, and then when I get to 9th grade, I have to do an algebra equation with that builds on that. And so what happens in a traditional academic model, the class just keeps moving. And so what is fixed is how long and when you have to work on something. And what's variable is how well you learn it. You have your grades, A, B, C, D, F. But the second pillar of Khan Academy, we think that there's an opportunity now where you don't have to make that compromise, where we can let every student learn at their own time and pace so that they have strong foundations, so that they can master the concepts. If we were talking about this 50 years ago, every teacher on the planet would say, yes, I know that when I have 30 students in my classroom, they all have different gaps. They all are ready to learn at different paces. But I, as one teacher, how do I support that? But now we can talk about using Khan Academy and software so that every student can learn at their own pace, master concepts. The teacher is informed in real time where their students are, and then they can do more focused interventions and really unlock the power of human-to-human interaction to really make sure that every student's needs are served. The last pillar that I'm a big advocate for, and we haven't had a chance to work on this as much, but I think this is going to get accelerated when we talk about the future, is how can someone prove what they know so that anyone in the world will recognize it and they have access to higher education or access to jobs. Actually, the previous guest's commentary really did touch on this notion. So that's what Khan Academy has been preaching, what we've been working on well before COVID. And then you go to March of last year and COVID hits. And this was one of those situations that I think none of us could have predicted, but it was one of those moments where, we kind of looked left, we looked right, and we said, I think this is us. I think we're going to have to step up now, because as soon as the schools started closing around the world, parents, families, teachers, they needed something that's free, that's accessible, that is well proven. There's over 50 efficacy studies on Khan Academy because it's open and it's rigorously researched. And so we saw our traffic go through the roof. We tried to start supporting parents and teachers with webinars and daily schedules. And then, when we started to realize that COVID, and the world started to realize that COVID was going to be a more extended school closures, or that we would have to do distance learning for longer, that's when we realized that, one, we would need to accelerate a lot of the parts of the vision that I just talked about, and that the world was going to be fundamentally different post-COVID. It's not that it would have changed the trajectory, but I think it accelerated the trajectory. So learning should not be bound by time or space. COVID has made that a reality, that learning cannot be bound by time or space. The idea of being able to give more, put more on students to have the independence to learn at their own time and pace. We're seeing that in COVID. We have to do that because all of the work that kids are doing are in the home environment. This idea of competency-based learning, regardless of how you learn it, regardless of how long it took you, the fact that you can get to a well-defined endpoint, this too is being catalyzed by COVID, because students are being able to engage at different levels. And the other thing that COVID is putting a big spotlight on, everything I talked about pre-COVID, one of the main barriers has always been the digital divide. As soon as COVID hits, we see the digital divide, the fact that middle income and upper class families have internet access, while low income families around the world tend to not have sufficient internet access. And so with COVID, I think the whole world has realized that the digital divide is unacceptable, that it's like having people in your city who don't have clean drinking water or electricity or heating, that this thing needs to be closed. And so what I see happening over this time period, over this COVID time period, which is likely to last for another 5-6 months at least, is that finally people are taking the digital divide seriously, and that's going to accelerate the fact that learning shouldn't be just bound by time or space. We're seeing a whole generation of teachers being thrown into the deep end of the pool with technology, which is very uncomfortable, and they're doing heroic efforts. But what the side effect of it is going to be that they're all going to be much more comfortable with technology after COVID is over. And so the frictions of adopting these technologies are going to be lower. You have a whole generation of parents and students who have now taken more ownership over the students' learning, which I think is going to be one of the major trends of the future. And people realize that with all of the gaps forming, people have been talking about a K-shaped recovery in the economy, that the people in the upper class are doing fine, but people in the lower incomes are doing worse. We're seeing a K-shaped recovery in education as well. A lot of middle income or upper class families, their kids are able to learn just fine. It's still a suboptimal for them. But with the families that don't have digital access, maybe they don't go to well-resourced schools, they are falling further and further behind. So as we get out of COVID, hopefully the digital divide is going to be addressed. You have parents that are more involved in schools, teachers who are more familiar with technology. And because of the gaps that formed, you're going to have, I believe, a more focused effort from the global education system on how do we fill in students' gaps. And that goes all to personalized learning. You can't just say, okay, let's not pretend like the last year happened and then just keep going with the motions of what we were doing before. We have to really think about how do we fill in those gaps. And so as you go forward, the future, I see a world, let's say 5 or 10 years, where Khan Academy is already available in 46 languages around the world. Our Spanish Khan Academy is one of the most built out ones, but you're going to be able to have all the academic material from pre-K through the core of college available for free for anyone in the world. It's going to be available in a way that's personalized. It's going to be localized. It's going to be available in, probably by that time, all of the major world languages. And you're going to have ways to prove what you know. And that evidence, some students, it might take them 2 weeks. Some students, it might take them 2 years to say they have proved that they have mastery in, say, finance or computer programming or writing or calculus. But that evidence is going to be used for higher education, or even to the previous conversations, point, it could be used for jobs or be used for apprenticeships. And, the last point I want to make about the future, because, I think we always inherently view technology as part of the future. And I am someone that a lot of people associate with technology and they associate with online learning. But I want to be very, very clear. If I had to pick between an amazing teacher in person for myself, for my children, for anyone's children, versus the most amazing technology, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, whatever, I would pick the amazing teacher every time, because you're not going to be able to replace that human connection and the ability for a human to connect with each other, empathize, and really motivate in ways that no technology is going to be able to do. So for me, it's never about technology first. It's always about what's our goal. And our goal is we want to form human connections. We want education to be a interactive experience, interactive from a human point of view. We want to maximize human to human conversation. We want to maximize personalization so that students don't feel checked out because the class is way ahead of them, or they don't feel bored because the class is behind them, that they feel engaged because things make sense to them, that it feels relevant to them. And then when you know what you're trying to do, then you say, what are our tools? Well, the teacher is the number one resource for students. And then the second resource is the community of fellow students. And so technology should be in service to that. Can technology facilitate ways for the students to engage with each other, maybe do peer-to-peer tutoring? Can technology facilitate for the students to learn at their own time and pace, get a lot of practice, get a lot of feedback, get lessons, so that it frees up teachers' time so that when they're in the classroom, teachers can take 5 kids aside and do more focused interventions while the other 20 or 25 keep working, or pair up 5 or 10 kids with each other so that they're able to tutor each other. There's a lot of evidence that tutoring, even from peers, is highly, highly effective, much more effective than just sitting and listening to a lecture. And so, and the last thing I'll say is a lot of the conversation around COVID, around how do you make video conference engaging for distance learning? And, the teachers that are doing it well, they're pulling the kids out of the screen. They're making them have conversations. They're putting them into breakout rooms. Every 10, 20 minutes, they're doing an interesting activity. They're creatively using the time. Instead of 60 minutes with 30 kids, they might be doing 10 minutes at a time with 5 kids. So you can get more personal interaction and also less time having to stare at a screen. I think all of these things are going to carry on into the physical world, because those are actually best practices even in a physical classroom. So, I think COVID is very suboptimal. A lot of kids are suffering right now. A lot of families are suffering right now. A lot of teachers are suffering right now. So this is not a good thing. But I think the silver lining is it's going to accelerate a lot of the changes needed to get to what I think in 5 or 10 years will be a very positive future, that if someone even has access to a cell phone, they're going to be able to not only access their potential, learn, but they're going to be able to prove what they know. And at that point, education itself, not just technology, but education itself, is really going to be like clean drinking water or basic shelter, and just kind of this fundamental human right that everyone is going to have access to.
Thank you so much, Sal. Your point of view is always inspiring. But stay with us, because I would like to introduce you to our special guest. They are going to ask you a few questions. And the first one is Carmen Morenés, General Director of Fundación Telefónica. Please, Carmen.
Hello, Sal. Thank you very much for being with us today. It's so important for people all over the world. We have more than 40,000 people that are following at the moment this conference from 44 different countries, and it's an incredible opportunity for them to hear all your experience. You know that we believe from Fundación Telefónica that, of course, teachers is the most important key for students, but technology is also an enormous potential, has an enormous potential to take opportunities to vulnerable environments. And we run a program that I think you know about it, because we talked before last year. We had the opportunity to show you through Pro Futuro that we take quality education to these really vulnerable environments. And we are feeling that many of them are getting a little bit disconnected at the moment, and they need help. What would you recommend us that we could train, or we could really give the tools to parents and to educators so that they are anybody is left behind in this kind of environments.
Yeah, I mean, what you're asking is, I think, the ultimate question, because we're seeing that issue around the world, that, you know, we talked about the digital divide, and y'all are doing incredible efforts to close the digital divide. So I really commend you on that. But even when you're able to get internet access or device access, we're still seeing that certain families, the students might not have the supports, or they might not have the savvy to know how to leverage these things properly. So, you know, I love your idea of, you know, maybe there's ways to, there's two possibilities. We've seen some communities where they're, even while distance learning is happening and the teachers are teaching from home, they're using the school facilities in a socially distanced way to bring those most vulnerable students, that 5 or 10% that don't have the right supports at home. Maybe they don't even have, you know, there's not even food security. They need, you know, they need the lunches from the school, to sometimes bring those students, only those students, that 5-10% into the school facility. They can, that, since it's much fewer students, they can be more socially distanced. And then you can potentially hire someone to provide the supports, including the technical support, so that the kids could be engaged. The other idea is exactly what y'all said, you know, provide direct training for families so that they know not only how to use the technology, but how to best support their children. And, you know, I think every family in the world right now is questioning whether they're doing enough for their children while they're doing distance learning. Even in my own household, we're always worried about, are we doing too much? Are we doing too little? And so I think the more guidance that we can give, especially for families that are, you know, spread thin right now, that are under-resourced, the better.
Sal, as you know, we have students with us today too, and the first one who wants to ask you something is Diego Cubian, a student at the Ramón y Cajal School in Madrid. Diego, please.
Thank you very much. I have a question I would like to ask you. What impact do you think online learning might have in students if it is normalized in the schools?
It's great question. So I personally hope that we don't go, I think 100% online learning or 100% distance learning, I think is a really, really bad idea for most students. Because as you know, when you go to school, yes, you learn how to factor a polynomial, you improve your reading comprehension, you learn your science and your social studies, but there's a lot that happens in between that's arguably just as important or more important. How do you build friendships? How do you collaborate? How do you negotiate through conflict? These are all things that happen in the physical environment that really don't happen in a distance learning environment. And so if we can keep kids, in classrooms in a real physical environment, that is optimal. As I talked about, our dream is always, how do you blend the two? Can you use online tools to support students, support teachers, so that when they come together in the physical environment, you optimize the physical environment even more? In a traditional school setting, the ones I grew up in, most of the time I had to just sit there and listen. I remember sometimes that we had to put fingers on our lips so that we don't talk, and we would just listen. And, I think we all remember that wasn't very engaging. Even though we were present in a room together, it was a little bit dehumanizing. But now with technology, you might have an opportunity to unlock that, where if you and your friends are able to learn at your own time and pace, get practice at your own time and pace, when you're in the classroom, the teacher can do more interactive things. Instead of saying you have to be quiet and listen, they should say, I want you to talk. I want you to interact with your friends, because that's the value of in-person learning. You can only do that in an in-person setting. Now, I do think there is some value to distance learning, potentially for part of the overall experience. For example, if you go to a high school and you are really interested in art history, but maybe your high school does not offer a course in art history, maybe for that course, you and maybe 4 or 5 friends who are interested in that subject could do a distance learning course, and they can get on Zoom and they can do that at a distance. That could be a positive. We've seen examples of, during distance learning in a school district, the system realizing that there's one teacher in the district that gives an amazing lecture on, say, the first unit. Well, if that teacher has really mastered that lecture, maybe that teacher could give that lecture to the entire school district. And that the other teachers are in support of that teacher. So people are still in person, but it's kind of hybrid distance learning. And then for the next unit, it might be a different teacher who's kind of the superstar lecturer. for that one. So I think distance learning is an interesting add-on. It's an interesting thing to experiment with, but we definitely, for 99% of students, it would be very suboptimal to go pure distance learning. I hope schools can leverage online learning for blending things, for the personalization. The only other place that distance learning and online learning can be really valuable is as you get older and you're not in formal school anymore, you're working, but you still want to improve your skills. That's where distance learning can be valuable. Or you're traveling. Travel is one of the best ways to learn. So you go on a trip to some other part of the world, but you can still stay in touch with your class or still learn by distance learning.
Sal, I would like to welcome Diego del Alcázar. He is Executive Vice President of IE University. It's your turn.
Thank you, Sal. I'm a huge admirer of yours. Last year, actually, the 18th of October, you were receiving from our Royal Highness, the Princess Leonor, the Princesa of Asturias prize. And I was at the hospital. My wife was giving birth to my two twins. So besides being an admirer, I also have this very nice memory from you receiving and giving that amazing speech. So at our university, we truly believe, as you say, that customization, that technology really humanizes education. Customization really can enhance the learning experience, and from our 20-year experience in liquid learning, we are able now to connect people that are making an internship in New York or that are having a social entrepreneurial project in Cambodia, for example. We can connect them to class. We are actually enhancing their physical experience as well, no? Besides having people face-to-face on campus. No? So having said this, universities are changing. And you had a full-time on-campus experience at Harvard and MIT. Do you think, or more than do you think, would you like that your kids would go to Harvard to have a 4-year experience as you had in university? Because content and knowledge is something that is king in education, but experience is emperor. And university gives you all that, all the other parts of educational experience that are so important. No?
Yeah, put simply, I couldn't agree with you more. The value of a university experience, I think the stated value, most people associate education is this is where I go learn a set of skills that are going to be useful for the rest of my life. That is a very important part of any education, especially university education. But there's two other things. There's the credentialing aspect of it. I've always wanted to do an experiment where, let's say you go to Harvard's graduation and you say, look, you find a random graduate and you say, how much debt do you have? Or, I'll pay all of your tuition that you paid Harvard the last 4 years. So you got all of the experience and you have all of the skills, but you're not allowed to tell anyone that you went to Harvard. How many students would take that? I think very few students would take that. So what that tells you is the value of being able to tell people that you have this credential, that you have this diploma is very, 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 very high. And I think if you did the opposite experiment, if you went to someone and you said, you have to pay twice as much money, and we'll give you a Harvard diploma, but you don't get the experience and you don't get the skills, I actually think some people would take that. So, I think in the traditional mindset, the value of the credential probably is more outsized than people realize. What I think is going to happen and what I would like to see, and then I'll tell you what I hope happens for my own children, is, today the message to everyone around the world is the only way to get a middle income or upper middle class kind of income career is by going 4 years. I think things are much better in Spain. In the US, especially at a lot of these private universities, it could cost $50,000, $60,000 per year. So this is an expensive, your cost of a university education, you can buy a nice house in much of the country. So it's a very costly enterprise. And that we also know that for some kids, it works out fine. They get jobs that if they have debt, they can pay that back. But for a lot of kids, they come out underemployed after putting, they might be 30, 40, 50, sometimes $100,000, $200,000 in debt. That's a suboptimal situation. So what I hope and I think is going to happen is universities aren't going to go away. you're also going to have alternative paths. The previous guests talked about some of those alternative paths, things like Lambda School. You're going to have more, where if you want to become a software engineer, yes, you can go to MIT or Stanford and get a good GPA, and that's going to be valuable. Or you could do things like Lambda School, get a job, and that's your decision. But what I think, to your question about what universities can do and what I would want, I think, the 4 years that I had at MIT as an undergrad, for me, were priceless. And the most priceless part of it was not sitting in a 300-person lecture hall. Not that all their classes are 300. Most of the classes were pretty small, but a lot of those introductory classes, there were 200 people in the room. And that you can do that better online through video or whatever. The MIT of the future, and I think MIT and a lot of universities, sounds like y'all are also already moving in this direction, that these lectures that have 50 people and 100 people, even 30 people in it, we don't have to do that anymore. That's not a good use of resources. That's not a good use of time. Everything about a university should be, how do we leverage the fact that we have all of these young people together, all of these amazing professors together? How do we get them to interact with each other? In fact, I think universities should measure that. They should benchmark themselves by how much physical interaction there are between the peers themselves and the teachers themselves. And that really should be their utility function of how much value they're adding as a physical environment, because the skills and everything else that can happen in other settings. And so for my own children, yes, I hope that they can, many of my best friends I met in college and university. I met my wife in university. You can't put a price on that. So I want them to have a very similar experience. But I could also imagine if one of my children said, Dad, I don't want to wait 4 years. I want to, do one of these programs, certification programs, and just start programming immediately or go into finance immediately. I would support them. Or, you could imagine, when we talk about having the amazing experience on a campus, which is true, but, there's other ways to also have amazing experiences. Maybe, a cohort of students, or maybe there's a new type of university where you travel around the world while you learn together, but you're able to leverage some distance learning to make sure you get your skills. That also would be an interesting experience. So I think you're going to see more diversity of experiences, and hopefully the universities that thrive are the ones that really anchor on making the in-person experience as interactive as possible.
Sal, let me introduce you to our next guest. She's Sandra Corrales. She's a student at the programming school E42 in Madrid. It's your turn.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I have to say that this is the best way of celebrating my birthday. 42 is a community that is 99% face-to-face and is peer-to-peer. So because of the COVID situation, it was very hard to us. And my question for you is, what is the key in Khan Academy that is actually working so well when it's actually 100% online?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of 42, and not only what 42 does, but the name. I don't know if people know in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it is the answer to the question of the meaning of life is 42. So I believe that's where the school was named after. But your point is exactly right. Khan Academy by itself, without in-person supports, there's certain students who can use that and learn at their own time or pace. And we get stories from folks all over the world. There was a young girl in Afghanistan, the Taliban keeps her from going to school, and she's able to use Khan Academy from home while she's doing chores to go from a 6th grade level, learn all the math, the science, and she decides that she wants to become a theoretical physicist in the US. She smuggles herself into Pakistan to take the SAT, and then the New York Times finds out about her and writes an op-ed about Meet Sultana, the Taliban's worst fear. And then she's able to get political asylum in the US. And last time I kept track of her, she was doing quantum computing research at Caltech. So there are those people out there that you need to give them at least that level of tools. And if you give it to them, they're going to be able to race and go wherever they can. But even for Sultana, and we know for most people, including myself, you need that plus a real community of learning. Whether it's an in-person learning, ideally, the way 42 does it, or, right now, because of COVID, we have to do distance learning. And so that's why everything we talk about is our ideal is Khan Academy being used in conjunction with the classroom. And what we hope is to actually turn those classrooms into a lot more like what you do at 42. Everything at 42, as you mentioned, you're doing stuff, you're making stuff, or you're helping each other, and it's peer-to-peer based, or you're working on projects together. That's the way all of schooling can be. And we're hoping that Khan Academy can really unlock that. I have another project that I've been working on that is a complementary to Khan Academy, which touches on this. It's called schoolhouse.world. This is another not-for-profit organization. And this whole point of this is you can learn at your own time and pace and watch videos and get practice on Khan Academy. But if you want live help, you can go to schoolhouse.world, and there's free volunteer tutors who've been vetted who will tutor you on any of the subjects. And we're going to, over time, offer all of the subjects, but it's free tutoring, literally free tutoring for anyone on the planet. And that the way we hope for people to prove what they know is for them to become amazing tutors themselves. You know, if I saw someone's resume and they have straight A's, and then I see someone else's resumes, and in those same subjects, they are well-reputed tutor in those subjects, I would take the person who's the tutor every time, because not only if to teach something, you have to have mastery of the material, and you have to have good communication skills. You have to have empathy for others. So I actually hope that not only helps close the gap on live interaction and live support, but also a new form of certification where the best thing that you can do is become an amazing teacher, and then people are going to want to hire you.
Sal, our next guest is Maria Benjumea. She's founder and CEO of Spain Startup. Maria, welcome again. It's your turn.
It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here with you. I admire you and your work a lot. And you know, from South Summit, what we work is with startups, just like a platform, a connected platform, focus on innovation and to connect all the different actors just for the transformation of society, no? Startups with corporates and with investors. And I lately read something that I like very much from your blog, no? When you say, don't say you're smart to a kid, you celebrate that really you are improving in your learnings, no? And when I read that, I said, that is just how we learned entrepreneurs, no? And how we learn by doing, and how we have to have open mind, absolutely always, and so on, no? And if we talk about entrepreneurs, and if we talk about innovators, you are the most, because there you are with everything you have launched and built during these years, and really absolutely gorgeous for educations. So if one of your kids tell you, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to launch a startup, and what would you say? What would be the learnings? And besides, you work with teachers, with schools. How do you think that really, I think that entrepreneur is key for the development of society and development of economics and everything. What would you say to your kid, and what would you counsel to the schools and teachers?
Yeah, no, a great question. You know, if my kids want to be an entrepreneur, and, you know, I'm secretly hoping they do, because, you know, entrepreneurs are the ones that, you know, kind of redefine the world we're in and create new things. The first thing I would make sure they're comfortable with is to be comfortable with failure. I mean, to your point, failure is a key part of entrepreneurship. And you have to, when you fail, in fact, because you will fail, I failed in more ways than I like to say, you will fail, especially as an entrepreneur. But when you fail, instead of viewing that as a statement about your capability or about your identity, you have to view that as an opportunity for learning. And, you know, there's a lot of research that our brains form the most connections, even when you're learning any subject, when you fail and you reflect on why you failed and you fail forward, you make that failure something that you can build upon. So the first thing I would try to encourage my children is have a growth mindset about it. The second thing I would remind them, because entrepreneurship is it's an emotional roller coaster. You know, you alternate between euphoria and despair. Euphoria and despair. One hour you think you're going to be able to change the world. The next hour you think you're the biggest failure on the planet. And it's very hard. And so you really need some mental tools to deal with this. You know, in ancient Indian philosophy, in Vedic philosophy, there's two types of action, or actually there's three types of action. One is called tamasic, which is kind of chaotic action where you're kind of acting without thinking. But the other two types of action, one is called rajasic. Rajas, it really, the word in Hindi or Sanskrit for king is Raja. And rajasic action is when you do something because you care because of the outcome. I'm going to do it because if I do it, something good's going to happen. Or if I don't do it, something bad's going to happen. And that's how most of us do most of our action. I better study, otherwise I'll get a bad grade. Or if I study, I'll get a good grade. It turns out that type of action, it's really stressful. It puts a lot of anxiety on you because you're so fixated on the outcome. The third type of action is called truthful action, sattva in Sanskrit, which is action where you do what is right, what is the next best thing for you to do, but the outcome is what it is. You accept whatever the outcome is. And I think as an entrepreneur, you really have to act that way, where you say, look, I am just going to do what I think is the best decision, the best action, given the information that I have. And it might work or it might not work. If it works, great, I'll build from that. If it doesn't work, I'm not going to go into depression. I'm going to look at it. I'm going to reflect on it. I'm going to accept it and then move forward from there. And so, not to get too preachy, but the third thing I would tell my kids is meditate. That has helped me a lot too, where I meditate every morning, 30 minutes. And so, as the winds, as I get, I have good days and bad days, but when I meditate, I remind myself, look, Sal, life is short. At the end of the day, this minor setback isn't the end of the world. Your family, your health, these are the things that matter. That's what I think can keep an entrepreneur going. In terms of what to do for the school system, this is, a lot of times when people look at international PISA rankings, they'll say, oh, look at Finland, look at Singapore, they have the best scores, maybe we should be like Finland or Singapore or Shanghai. And first of all, I don't think that's fair because, you can't compare all of Spain or all of the United States versus Singapore or Finland, which is really all of Finland is the size of one big city, or even Shanghai, because not every kid in China is taking those tests. But even more, the test scores actually aren't the important thing. What I tell people in the US, and I am a little bit biased on I tell people in America, I was like, instead of making our school system more like the Finnish school system or the Singaporean school system, we need to make our school system more American. And when I say that, and it's not only American, but one of the associations with that I have, my family comes from the Indian subcontinent, and in India, people are very, it's changing, but historically people care how rich was your family, what is, who's your lineage. They care a lot about that. And if you fail, it's stigmatized. Oh, the people talk about you. Oh, so-and-so tried that, didn't work. There's a lot of gossip. While in the US, and especially in, say, Silicon Valley, which is where I live, no one cares what your parents did. In fact, people are proud if they grew up poor. They'll say, hey, I grew up like this and my parents didn't have any money. And, people view that as almost like a sign of honor. And that if someone fails, people say, hey, that was good. You tried, keep going. People really, really respect that. And so I think our school system needs to be more like that if you fail a test or if you get a C on a test, we shouldn't tell you that you're a C student forever, put a C essentially on your forehead. We should tell you, you just haven't learned it yet. Reflect on what you missed and keep going. We're going to give you another shot. That's how you're going to really grow.
Sal, I don't know if our next guest wants to be an entrepreneur, but he's pretty young. He's Javier Lorenzana Orts, a student at the Ramón y Cajal School in Madrid. Please, Javier.
Hi, Sal. You have just talked about poverty and the problems it has. And my question is, how would you bring education to all the corners of the world, especially to those where they don't have enough resources to attend to normal classes? And do you think this will have a disruptive impact in society?
Yeah, what you're describing is exactly why I wanted to start Khan Academy. When we have a mission, free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, obviously, it's great if middle income folks can use it, because I think even they are suffering from having gaps in their knowledge. And, I've seen even affluent kids have trouble with algebra, not because they're not bright, but because they had gaps in their knowledge and they needed extra support. But the real value of Khan Academy happens when these kids who otherwise would not have had resources, the children that you talk about, are able to tap into their potential. But I think to reach them fully, there will be the sultanas of the world where even if they have nothing else and they just have a cell phone or a cheap laptop and they're able to access Khan Academy, they're going to be off to the races. But my dream is, in 5 or 10 years, pretty much anywhere in the world, one, you'll have internet access, hopefully, some of these satellites, Starlink that they're putting in the sky, or, groups like Telefonica with the work that they're doing to get, internet access to more and more folks, that in 5 or 10 years, everyone has access, everyone has devices, and that ideally, if you're in a rural village in India or Africa, and, one of the problems is that there might not even be someone within 20 miles who can teach, say, calculus or chemistry or writing, that, there could at least be some place where the kids can go that's safe, where they can have some access, and that they can access Khan Academy. And Khan Academy is there to support them so they can practice, they can learn, they can prove what they know, but they're also part of a community. Maybe there's someone in the village that, a local nonprofit or, that can pay to make sure that the computers are up and running. But I think if we have that type of thing, then, we have a much better shot of having an equitable playing field. One model that I try to live my life by, regardless of whether if we are born again, I don't know what happens after we die, but just imagine you are born again, you're randomly born anywhere in the world. We don't know. You're more likely to be born in India or China in a poor family in a village than we are to be born in Spain or the US in a middle-class family. And so given that framework, how can we selfishly benefit our next version of ourselves, where we're more likely to be born in Africa or India or China? And my hope is that, the things that we can create in 50 years, that if someone is born in that village in India or Africa, that they have at least hope. They have a lifeline so they can learn whatever they need to learn.
And last but not least, I'm happy to welcome again Miguel Barrero. He's a General Director of Fundación Santillana. Miguel.
Hello, Salman. Thank you for being part of Enlightened. It's a pleasure for all of us to share with you this session. I would like to know your view, focus on K-12, so in schools. Khan Academy is a project based in online and remote learning, which something which has been a critical and a key issue in the school lockouts. Yeah. So, what role do you imagine for the brick and mortar schools? Do you think it's the time for a hybrid model? And related with this, how is running your own brick and mortar project, the Khan School Lab?
Yeah, so what you're alluding to, 6 years ago, I started a physical school, and I started it because I never imagined that virtual school, that distance learning or online by itself is sufficient. And I was also selfishly motivated. My oldest son at the time was 4.5 years old. So, I've been preaching for the last 10, 15 years, personalization, mastery-based learning, peer-to-peer learning. And so I said, my son and now my daughter and my youngest son, they also go there. They should go to a place like that. But even more, I said, look, in a world where Khan Academy is able to reach hundreds of millions of people around the world, it still might not change the way that a physical school model works. And so, I wrote One World Schoolhouse back in, actually, I'm not trying to promote my book, but, I wrote One World Schoolhouse back in 2012, where, the first third of One World Schoolhouse was, how did the education system globally become the way it is? The middle third of the book was, my story on how I started Khan Academy. And then the last third of the book is, let's reimagine what schooling could look like. There's some things that have nothing to do with technology. Do we need summer vacation anymore? Should school come out at 3 o'clock when most parents have to work till 5 or 6 o'clock? Can we have full year, full day schooling? But also things like, can we do competency-based learning? Can we do mastery, personalization? Can we leverage the power of peer-to-peer? How do we unlock that? And, it's one thing to write all of these things down on paper and to cite research papers, but it's a whole other thing to try to build it yourself. And that was the goal of Khan Lab School. And, now 6 years later, it's a K through 12 school. It's going to have its first graduates. And, it's been really heartening to see that I think a lot of these principals do work, that you can actually give students a lot more independence. And when they do, they can interact with each other more. And, when COVID hit and they had to become distance learning, they didn't miss a beat because the school was always about students having autonomy and then the teachers working in support of that. In terms of, the future of, what is the physical setting about and does hybrid learning make sense? As I've said, the physical setting is incredibly valuable, but we should really double down on what it is. It's a place where we're there together. So we should be interacting when we get on a physical setting together. It breaks my heart when I observe classrooms and all the kids are just sitting like this. And they're there physically, but we've all been there. We know that they're not often there mentally. They're looking at the clock, they're daydreaming. Because if you just lecture at 30 kids, half the kids are lost, half the kids are bored. What we need to do is really push the system, leverage online tools, so hybrid, so that kids can get as much practice as they need. If they need help with a certain topic, they can watch a video. So when you get to class, you're not lecturing. When you get to class, they can do more problem solving. They can get into groups together, work on things together, explain things together, do peer-to-peer learning, have Socratic dialogues, do simulations. So that's the dream. The other benefit of hybrid learning or hybrid distance learning, and we're seeing it now, the school, my Khan Lab school, where my children go, for the youngest kids, they've started to bring them in, but certain families are comfortable with that. Certain families are not right now. So half the kids are there with masks on, socially distanced, and the other half of kids are at home. And the beauty of what's happening now is they're able to still all interact together. And so even after COVID, I'm hoping that, let's say my family, let's say I have a trip to Spain. Last year when I had the honor of coming to Spain, I said, I need to bring my kids. They need to see this. This is going to be a once in a lifetime experience. So I brought my kids and they missed school, but that was, in the future, it's okay if they miss school. They can still be with their classmates through hybrid learning. Or if someone is sick or if someone has to do something, they can still stay connected. So I think that's going to be the real power of hybrid learning as we go into the future.
Salman Khan, thank you for your wisdom, for your words, for being here with us in this Enlightened 2020. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.